everyone, and a very warm welcome to Amhara Media Corporation. This is our daily news live from the studio. I am Gaila Damu. Stay with us. For the past 12 years, Jacob's mayor of South Africa has known all parts of Ethiopia, and he has traveled a lot with numerous memories about his historical nation. Mentioning the recent campaign of the Western media on Ethiopia, he said that those reports have detached the reality on the ground. Abebe Brahani reports.
Some international media outlets have been disseminating false information about the current situation in Ethiopia as part of an attempt to enhance their hidden agenda of destabilizing the country. Despite the intensified false propaganda of these media, Jacob's mayor came to Ethiopia with his friends and has now been traveling to different places in the country. He said that the recent reports of the Western media outlets, including the BBC and CNN, that Addis Ababa was under siege by the terrorist DPLF and its ally, caused tremendous frustration on many of the people who are concerned about Ethiopia. Acknowledging that Ethiopia is undergoing through what looks like a coordinated media campaign to tarnish its image, however, he said that those news media reporters have detached the reality on the ground. When some of the media in the West had been disseminating false information, he telephoned to his friends in Addis Ababa and proved the malicious intentions of the news media against Ethiopia.
You see things on some of the Western media, and that obviously it makes you concerned. You know, I've got a young family. You know, I'm never going to want to put myself or my friends or anybody that we travel with. We don't want to put them in any danger. So, you know, my first port of call was, you know, we've got people on the ground here in Ethiopia that we trust. You know, people like Sesai Shewamane. You know, we trust their call. You know, I made one call to him, and he assured me that, you know, everything was good on the ground. So, you know, you have to trust the people that you trust in the countries you travel to. So when I was told that, you know, a lot of it is not real.
For him, the reality in Ethiopia and the media reports about the country was entirely different.
So, you know, when I was told that everything was fine, I decided, okay, let me come through. So I came here, and I've been here. We've traveled a lot. We've been to Bali. We spent a week in Bali. We spent, you know, 2-3 days in Awash, near Far. And it's been pleasant, you know. Everybody we've met, all the people, you know, it's been a very, very pleasant experience. You know, everything to me is the same as it was, you know, last year and the year before and the year before that. You know, so you know, if not even better. You know, the people are very happy to see us, and they just, you know, they want the tourism. You know, and it's sad that Ethiopia is getting the wrong media out there.
Noting that Ethiopia has been wrongly framed by Western media outlets and they are intensified by unreasonable pressure, this South African nationality said these media always make things seem a lot worse scenario than they are for the African countries. He blamed the Western media outlets for their false information about the reality in Ethiopia. Mayor finally urged the Western news media to send their journalists to Ethiopia and get the real story from the people on the ground instead of showing biased information that detaches from the context.
Talking to all the Western media outlets, I'd like to say, you know, send your people here, get some people on the ground and get the real story from the people on the ground. You know, instead of listening to people that are 6,000 miles away, come to Ethiopia, come see for yourself what's happening here. Because, you know, I said I've been here for 2 weeks and I've had no issues at all.
State Minister of Finance Dr. Eyob said there is evidence that outside forces are supporting the terrorist DPLF. Brandwork and Atil Sasmore.
In an exclusive interview with DD India, Eyob said TPLF has caused a lot of pain on Ethiopians at large over 3 decades. The group previously tried to incite conflicts across the country to create difference among nations and engaged into open aggression with the objective to disintegrate Ethiopia. They started war by attacking the northern command of the Ethiopian National Defense Force based in Tigray region for 2 decades. He added that after it instigated the conflict, the amount of damage that has been inflicted on the people of Tigray Amhara and Afar regions and the general public is very painful. This was because the group didn't see the opportunity for peaceful coexistence of nations across the country.
It's very important to understand the genesis of this conflict. As you know, 3 years ago, when Prime Minister Abiy came to power, he introduced sweeping reforms across political, social, and economic spheres. And this reform was an effort to create a stronger, united federal Ethiopia that works for all.
Ayoub said the TPLF group, which has ruled the country for almost 3 decades and controlled the economic and political life of the country, did not accept this reform and made all possible efforts to disrupt the reform process. Because of the nature of the conflict, the entire Ethiopian public is mobilized and this threat is being neutralized and efforts are underway to bring back Ethiopia to the normal process of peace, development and democracy. He said that the propaganda of the TPLF that the government was purposely using famine as weapon war and blockage of humanitarian access was baseless.
In a conflict area, you always have some challenge. Like when there are skirmishes in parts of the country, it will be difficult for humanitarian people to operate. But as that report showed, the propaganda from TPLF that the government was purposely using famine as a weapon or that humanitarian access was being denied on purpose, I think has been proved to be wrong.
Ayoub further said that the fake news that the capital is under siege is part of the psychological warfare that the TPLF group is undertaking.
Standing from the Ethiopian government and the Ethiopian public, this is a proxy war. I mean, clearly, it's not a conflict between one rebel group that supposedly is calling for more independence, but it's actually a war against the very state of Ethiopia. Forces from our side are supporting TPLF. We have credible intelligence evidence about satellite support, about some armament support, which is very unfortunate.
He explained that the stability of Ethiopia is very important for the East African region. Ethiopia is an icon of stability. If Ethiopia is affected, the rest of the region will be affected. Dr. Ayoub underlined that he wants to assure external forces that Ethiopia will prevail at the end, and any proxy war in Ethiopia has never succeeded and never succeeds now. Regarding bilateral ties between India and Ethiopia, he said the two countries have enjoyed very strong and solid relationship in the economic sphere.
But on the political front, I think the principled stance that India has taken, I think, is not just something that has pleased the entire Ethiopian public. I think it gave hope for the entire African people, because the whole notion that the sovereignty of countries is at attack by some Western forces was a serious concern by many in Ethiopia and Africa.
He thanks the government and people of India for supporting Ethiopia at this critical time. Africans are capable of resolving their problems and the government has seriously appreciated the efforts of African Union. He calls to the United States that punitive measures and sanctions doesn't work in this kind of situation. What works is discussion and understanding the reality on the ground.
Violating international laws, Western nations are trying to intervene in the internal affairs of Ethiopia in different forms. Regarding this, we have an expertise view and Fikradi Zaudu presents the full story.
Charter of United Nations is the founding document of the United Nations. It was signed on the 26th June 1945 in San Francisco and came into force on the 24th of October 1945. Member states of the United Nations are expected to be abided by this charter. Article 2.4 of the charter stated that all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purpose of the United Nations. Violating this article of the United Nations Charter, Western nations are trying to intervene in the internal affairs of Ethiopia in different forms. And regarding this, I have Dr. Kalawangel Menala from Bahar Dar University, Political Science and International Relations. Thank you very much for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So the Western forces are trying to intervene in the internal affairs of Ethiopia in different ways. In some countries they have geopolitical interest, and in some countries they have the interest of establishing a puppet government. So what are the basis of their operation when it comes to Ethiopia?
Well, thank you for having me again. I think it's important to say it out from the very outset that this is international intervention is a highly controversial and a highly debatable issue in political science. There are calls and counter calls for international intervention. It should also be noted that in this case we're talking about unilateral intervention. Interventions are of two types. You have the unilateral intervention of member states of the United Nations, and at times you also have multilateral intervention under the auspices of the United Nations. When it comes to the very basis of unilateral intervention, it's usually made on the basis of the principle of humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. Notably, these kind of interventions are made on the basis of the claim for resolving the conflict, promoting stability, providing humanitarian aid and relief, protecting civilians. These are the kind of excuses that these states often use. But then here we have two issues. One is this kind of interventions often negate, they often negate another international law principle, which is sovereignty of states, the principle of sovereignty and non-interference, and hence it comes as a challenge. This intervention for humanitarian intervention, it comes as a negation, as a challenge to this principle of sovereignty and the non-interference of states. Secondly, these kind of unilateral interventions are often made for geopolitical calculations, establishing a clientele state, and in some cases even for regime change. So it's often perpetrated under the guise or disguise of humanitarian intervention, but then the real reasons are these geopolitical interests of these states.
So we can say like the operations that's exercising in Ethiopia are unilateral?
Yeah, I mean, in the case of Ethiopia, we're talking about unilateral interventions. We haven't so far seen a kind of intervention under the auspices of the United Nations or regional organizations such as African Union or IGAD. It's the pressure coming from Western states, notably from the United States of America.
Similar interventions have been exercising all over the country, in so many countries all over the world. What makes the case of Ethiopia different?
Well, I would say it's largely similar. As I have said, it's based on those principles of humanitarian intervention and the responsibility to protect. So humanitarian relief aid, I mean, they just often come as excuses, as justifications for intervention. So it's largely similar with the kind of interventions which we have seen in the rest of the world. But if it's different, the intervention this time by the United States does not seem to have, taken lessons from past experience of the state. The United States had like several interventions around the world, and so they don't seem to have, taken or learned lessons from that intervention. I also feel like they feel like they don't seem to have gotten the facts with regard to the conflict in Ethiopia. They don't seem to have understood the complexity of the conflict, They don't seem to have understood the history of this country. This country has a long history of shunning and defeating foreign intervention. So they don't seem to have a sense of these complexities. Otherwise, it's largely similar with the kind of intervention.
What about the United Nations Security Council consecutive meetings only about Ethiopia? They conducted like 4 meetings within 2 months about Ethiopia.
Yeah, I mean, these meetings are often, instigated by member states. They had a consecutive meeting over Ethiopia. That's probably one remarkable thing about this intervention. But generally, the United Nations, the intervention there, it's the multilateral intervention I was mentioning, I was referring. If there is any intervention under the auspices of the United Nations, it would be a multilateral one. And we have had these kind of interventions in the past, and they are entirely different from these unilateral interventions. So we need to differentiate between interventions by member states and interventions by unilateral organizations such as the United Nations.
Why do you think the Western countries are affectionate towards DPLF when it's destroying the whole country?
Well, it's again those geopolitical calculations and real political calculations. When the objective, the real objective of the intervention is regime change, they often, instigate a campaign of blackmailing, coercing, and a smearing campaign against the central government, and rewarding and blessing the rebel groups. So this happens usually on the basis of the real political agenda of the intervening state, and it usually it's not even it usually is not limited to the affectionate and applauding of the rebel forces. It also comes in different forms in terms of providing supplies, ammunitions, weaponry, technology, satellite technology, and things like that. So it's something which even goes beyond affectionate and applauding the rebel forces and blackmailing the central government. It's something which really goes beyond affections. I mean, it usually translates into actions in the form of providing supplies such as ammunition, weaponry, and stuff like that. So this happens on the basis of the real political agenda of the state. When the state believes that the rebels are more likely to advance the interest of the intervening state, they tend to blackmail, coerce, compel the central government, and at the same time by rewarding the rebel forces.
It's obvious that we're talking about politics, and there's always ulterior agendas, ulterior motives of other countries, right? But can they do it without denouncing the federal government of Ethiopia?
No, that doesn't really happen. You either support the federal government, side on the side of the central government, and neglect, the rebel forces, or it could be the opposite, like denouncing the central government in power, the regime in power, and encouraging and supporting the rebels advancing to dismantle the central government.
Okay, my last question is, do you think the Western's intervention, can resolve the conflict in Ethiopia? Does it have any contribution?
Well, I think looking at the experience of countries throughout the world, much of the evidence indicates that unilateral interventions often complicate conflicts. These countries, intervening countries, they intervene supporting one or the other group as actors of the conflict. And so the evidence, as we've seen in many countries throughout the world, including our neighbors such as Somalia, unilateral interventions by superpowers, they often complicate the situation, and they contribute in terms of escalating the conflict. So it often comes as a problem, further complicating the security situation of the country. So in many ways, the evidence which we have now indicates that it's more of a complication rather than a solution. But then at the same time, it's also important to mention that it's much better, to engage these partners rather than disengage them, because engagement provides at least two opportunities. One, we can discuss, have a dialogue with these partners, with these allies, and address their legitimate concerns. One, plus the second thing is the dialogue. The engagement process provides us an opportunity for a dialogue, to discuss points of difference and chart, a way out. And so, generally speaking, these unilateral sanctions, interventions, they often are not solutions. But then at the same time, disengaging, avoiding these partners, is not also a solution. So the most important thing to keep in mind would be engaging these allies, having a dialogue and discussion with them, in the hope of resolving, addressing some of their real and legitimate concerns, and then have a discussion, have a deliberation on those points of difference.
That's all the news we have for today. I am Gaila Damu. Many thanks for watching and stay tuned with the rest of our programs.